Welcome to this session on working productively through the cloud, here hosted by Al Jazeera. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. What I like particular about this session is that we have three members of the broadcast industry from different geos and different channels, and two solutions providers who give world-class technology solutions to the likes of you and I in this industry. To my immediate left here, we have Richard Friedel, who's the Executive Vice President of Fox Technology and Strategy. Next to him, we have Hussam Abudan, Al Jazeera's very own Manager of Media Operations. To the left of him, we have Ben Silva, Senior Vice President of Global Video Solutions, Huawei. To his left, we have Chris Johns, Chief Engineer, Broadcast Strategy at Sky. And last but not least, along the end there, we have Michelle Munson, CEO and co-founder of a new company, Eluvio, who also has the pedigree of being one of the CEOs and founding members of the Aspera technology. Now, what I'd like to start with the discussion today is looking at the stories from the different broadcasters in particular. So, what challenges did we face 10 years ago? What challenges are we facing now? And how do we think the cloud can solve or help us solve some of those issues? So maybe if I could start with Richard, you know, in the industry at Fox, tell us one of the stories of how things are with you right now.
An open-ended question. Since it's a cloud presentation, we'll obviously focus on that. We've got a number of initiatives at the moment related to cloud. Supply chain, which was discussed earlier. We've got some initiatives related to distribution. We've got initiatives related to our pending purchase by Disney of Fox, where the new Fox is going to be a small agile company which is moving into a cloud-based environment completely. So I'm not sure if one of those intrigues you more than another, but I guess I'll talk about supply chain. I think that may be the most interesting one to the audience. We've actually become involved in a partnership with Turner Broadcasting, Discovery, and Fox with a company called SDVI, which is a front-end supply chain system to integrate, or not integrate, to bring content in to each of the three companies. It's completely based in AWS. There's a producer portal that was created that producers push content into. They include metadata as well as the content. It's automatically checked for correctness, and it's checked to see whether or not indeed it meets some contractual obligation that they have. If it does, it continues through a process of QC and transformation appropriately, as we're used to now. It's just this is completely automated. At any point where it fails a test, it's pushed back to the producer automatically.
Mm-hmm. So I guess, you know, Fox's business model is kind of a business-to-business model right now.
Yes.
It's a distribution network. Mm-hmm. So you're utilizing cloud technologies for new distribution opportunities.
Yeah.
So that's your current experience of the cloud. Hussam, you know, you and I have worked together a lot on the workflows in London and in DC and Balkans and here in Doha, and we face many of the same challenges. Could you highlight some of those challenges to the audience today, please?
Well, actually, in fact, we have been in continuous improvement in Al Jazeera in our technical infrastructure and transformation. And we have moved from tape-based workflow to file-based workflow across multiple areas. And we introduced new automated workflows throughout the last 5 years. And this has actually helped us in improving the support for our editorial teams to deliver the message that Al Jazeera is delivering as one of the leaders in the media industry. And the point in here, with working on continuously improving the workflows and trying to speed up the workflow, we are looking for exploring a new technology and new ways of simplifying the workflow and making it quick. And also, as we are moving and transforming our video format to HD with large and huge files, So for sure, we are looking at speed of delivery, because as you all know, we are a news channel, and we need to always keep in mind to deliver the news quickly and easy.
And I think one of the things you mentioned a moment ago was, simplicity.
That's right.
And I know that simplicity and innovation are very high on Michelle's agenda, so I'm looking forward to her talking about those in a second. Chris, you've been at Sky since its inception in 1989, and you're very much involved in metadata, UHD, VR, and you're also a fellow of SMPTE. Now, could you talk a little bit about maybe the elections coverage that you did recently and how that was enabled through cloud technology?
Okay, so in that instance, the cloud enabled you to deliver something you'd never be able to do just a few years earlier. One of the ambitions we wanted to do is give as many people the opportunity to see their local constituency counts and find out what their new Member of Parliament was actually going to be, without having to wait for it to go through the main control hub and then be fed out as a live feed. So we used Google Cloud Services to actually aggregate all 150, I think it was a Guinness record at that point in time for simultaneous live streams. We aggregated 150 live streams from constituents and then enabled them to be fed out in parallel to the customers at home, but also to the Sky studios with no delay as well. So on one side you were doing an encode and stream to the home, and on the other side you were sending the raw feedback to the studio, so we could actually use it then. So that's one example of how you can actually deliver contribution in a way to the many, which you'd have never been able to do in the past. The other side of the coin is being able to process content as well. Being a pay TV provider, we have to provide the customer what they want. In times gone by, that could be a long, arduous process while you ingested content and put it onto your platform. So nowadays, you can just batch ingest a lot of things and get them pre-encoded and delivered to you. So whilst the day-to-day running may be kind of slow, if you need to have peaks, you can take those peaks very, very easily and just take them into the cloud and deliver to the consumers something they need very, very quickly. So it's benefits if you know where to use the cloud, I think.
I think what you're touching on there is one of the things that Mark Harrison said a minute ago in his keynote speech is, consumers love video and love content, and our responsibility as content creators is to get that to them as reliably and as fast as possible. And this again is something I want Michelle to talk about in a second, but what I'd like Ben to mention for a minute is some of his use case stories from the customers that you've worked with at Huawei, and help us to demystify what the cloud is. When I speak to people about the cloud, they immediately say, okay, it means I'm going to take all of my content, all of it, and stick it somewhere off premises, and that's what the cloud is, full stop. But we know that it's a much bigger picture than that. In fact, moving content into the cloud or into storage elsewhere than on premises is just the tip of the iceberg. And in many respects, it doesn't have to be any part of the iceberg, right? You can keep all your content on premises and still utilize the cloud. So please, maybe you could talk about the TF1 media cloud that you work with?
Sure. I think, in the entertainment business, especially in news and broadcast, we're very opinionated because all of us get to the point where we get in our career by various paths. So we get really opinionated about certain things. So when we start talking about the cloud, everyone has a different opinion of what it is or what it should be. But in reality, there's the cloud and there's the hybrid cloud. We developed, a tremendous system in China for Shenzhen Media Group, which in turn brought us to TF1. And TF1, we were able to cut them down to 80 workstations for all of their editing, 160 stations for all their operational capacities. We're able to do 8 channels of HD in different layers in real time. And the net result was, that they were able to not only produce content significantly faster by having the cloud, but the amount of money that they saved in 50% less equipment, 50% less real estate, the financial savings actually allowed them to hire more people. A lot of people think by having the cloud, you're actually going to eliminate jobs, but in reality, it frees up a bunch of money to really allow you to hire more creative people. So not just from the standpoint of delivering broadcast, but now delivering content or consumer-centric news at the same time, right? So using Facebook and YouTube and some of the other areas and marrying those news crews together allowed them to become far more efficient. So I think utilizing the cloud is not only the way to go, and I think we talk about it. I don't think it's a matter of whether or not you're going to go to the cloud. The question is, when are you going to go to the cloud, and who's the right partner to take you there? I think that's the reality of where it's going.
You know, you and I spoke earlier on in the day, and one of the things that I find really interesting is the fact that in the past, if you wanted to try out a new workflow, you had to buy the kit, install the kit, get cooling, get power, and then if it didn't quite do what you wanted it to do, you start again and go and buy some more stuff.
Right.
And now you can spin up an instance of that workflow in the cloud, template it, and copy and paste it, and try out and try out and try out new things. Michelle, you know, why is it you think that broadcasters and media companies have, are a bit late coming to the cloud as opposed to, say, an IT company or a banking system? Is it because of the massive files we have to move around? And if it is, how would you solve those solutions, those problems?
Well, I think first and foremost, the media and entertainment industry, to my experience, has actually been a fairly early adopter of cloud-based technology and related cloud-based infrastructure. My vantage point on this is, though, probably comes from some of the newer business models, such as OTT services, the Aspera implementation to support cloud storage and effectively high-speed transport of video-based files in and out of cloud object storage was really generated by our relationship with Netflix. And that started back in 2009 when really the S3 model of Amazon Web Services was just starting to become adopted. So it was fairly early on. Now, fast forward to today, what I'm presently involved in is probably the least familiar to everybody here because it is brand new, and really what we're attempting to do in our new efforts is to take a step beyond what has been the way of building media workflows and achieving distribution on top of what we think of today as cloud infrastructure. And while there are tremendous economies of scale that we have gotten out of moving our IT workflows to these kinds of environments, there have also been, if you will, some changes in the industry that have made that inadequate for where we feel like we're trying to go. And one of those is just the huge volume of media that we're dealing in. And to bring together just a few key ideas that deserve a longer conversation. We have one, the complexity problem that has accrued with file-based workflows. Two is the cost, and even though clouds have helped to create some efficiencies, we still are being outstripped by the dominant costs in distribution and management of those file workflows, and then versioning, where nowadays with so much media going to so many different territories, we're seeing lots of copies and replication in the process. And so bringing this all together, the reason I'm involved in starting this new effort, Eluvio, is because we think that there's a different approach that we need to take at the sort of fundamental level in terms of how we distribute media and metadata and establish a foundation through a content fabric that allows us to really clean slate, use our infrastructure, and at the same time be able to do this in a dramatically more simple and efficient way. It also addresses this matter of trust that Mohammed talked about this morning. The reality is that we do have new technologies that we can turn to that have truly decentralized trust models like decentralized ledgers, blockchains, and by incorporating those in with the media fabric or the content fabric, as I'm talking about, we have capacity now to really change fundamentally how security is looked at and also to bring native commerce capabilities directly into what we think of as media workflows. So I think we're at a very opportunistic point to go really beyond what has been the cloud-based workflow since 2008-9 when we were first getting involved.
Richard, Friedel, I'd just like to touch on the fact that there's some change happening at Fox right now, and we're looking at new Fox, which is going to focus on news and sport. How do you think, in particular, you'll be able to leverage cloud services for those two, in particular, live sports events?
Well, there are several aspects to New Fox. You've described it well. It's really a play for live broadcasting, live traditional broadcasting in the United States. We're going to end up with roughly 40 television stations and television network, a sports and a news organization. And it's so tightly focused, we see an opportunity to change much of our business from the way it's been operating. Some of that is by changing the enterprise systems and the basic back office. That'll all be put in the cloud, and that's pretty straightforward this day and age. But what we are looking forward to is trying to move live content processing into the cloud. The SDVI project I mentioned to you earlier is one step in that, and although it's not being used for live at the moment, it's being used for our pre-recorded and pre-produced content. There is nothing that will stop it from being used for live, and in fact there's a test, what do you call it, proof of concept that will be started right before NAB with Fox News, so we'll be able to determine how we're going to optimize this system for that, because at the moment it's not inherently optimized for speed. We know we have to change it to do that, and we're going to have to put in a bypass, if you will, for some of the processes to speed things up, because as a crucial news story, you're going to bypass a number of the steps to get it on the air.
Hussam, Al Jazeera is also looking at and working with cloud-based technologies. What questions, do you have as, manager of an operations environment that I think are going to affect your teams? I think one of the things we might want to talk about are the tools that the end users have, and do they care about the technology in the back end and what's driving the systems?
Yeah, actually, Richard, in here, when we think about any improvement in the systems that we're using, we need to look for the integration between the systems. And I will recall what was mentioned in the beginning of the day today, when the technology needs to think of the user now, not the vendor. And this is the key word, and this is actually one of the aims for this summit, is to have this open conversation and let all the vendors understand that at the end of the day, the users and the operations and the editorial teams looking forward for simple, well-integrated system where we can trigger our workflows easily. We can do the operational troubleshooting in case of issues, and this is the key word that I think everyone in this industry should focus on. Vendors should not work individually, but should work. And in fact, in the last 2-3 years, we started seeing some cooperation between the vendors in order to make one complete ecosystem, where I think that the technology should move toward this direction.
So an open ecosystem with SDKs and APIs that we can hook into, and maybe as broadcasters ourselves, we can create our own hooks into those to create products for ourselves that we want to design. Chris, is it a similar story at Sky?
It's similar, but a little bit different. Since we're now part of Europe, we've got to cater for not only the UK's needs, but also our German and Italian colleagues, and we've got to integrate with them. So it does come down to being able to share content and share it in a more efficient way. And we've got a current project underway called Content Supply Chain, which we're trying to actually ascertain the most efficient way of being able to share content, acquire content, and process it through the entire chain. And part of that is realizing which elements are best capitalized and kept inside Sky as a single pipeline, and which you can actually put outside into the cloud, into the other areas, which is more flexible and can be shared across the territories. So that's work in hand. It sounds very simple when you say it in one sentence, but when you look at the complexity of it and you draw a block diagram, trust me, it's not a very easy thing to do.
Ben, you do a lot of work not only in the broadcast industry, but also in the film and very high-end post-production industry, where the likes of Avatar and beyond, right?
Correct.
So one of the things that often gets discussed is, if I put my HD content off premises, can I really play it back in real time? And what's the latency? Can I perform as an editor still? Can I shuttle back and forth? Can I create cuts and dissolves and visual effects? Is it really possible with cloud-based technology?
Oh, it's completely possible. I mean, so we'll take Disney Television Animation as a good example. They have offices throughout the world, from the Philippines to France to Canada, and they work in a proprietary 2K format. So,
2K.
and working that proprietary 2K format, we went to a universal data center design and scheduling, and we basically built a cloud specific to Disney Television Animation. And the net result of that was not only could they edit in real time, but they could work 24 hours a day between all the geographical territories. And the result was they could produce a television animated feature in 25% less time. So that allowed them to actually be able to pursue new creative ideas, new creative shows, because they had a bunch of extra time on their hands. So you absolutely can do it. You know, there's intricacies on what's local and what's in the cloud and what's part of the hybrid cloud. So you have to be able to work through those issues. I think the most important thing to realize is that utilization of the cloud or the hybrid cloud, every company is different. Every workflow is different. So to think that there's one size fits all would be an incorrect assumption. You know, so really truthfully, it comes down to partnering with the right company to say, okay, here's what we want to accomplish, and having that system designed specifically for what you want to be able to do.
So I guess there are three cloud models, right? There's the private cloud, there's the public cloud, and then there's the hybrid cloud, which is a bit of both, where you might, you know, on a private cloud, you might be risk averse and you want to have control of your assets. So for the broadcast industry, which works best, do you think?
I think the hybrid cloud works the best,
cloud.
Definitely. So, and I think it's a combination of both. Because once you have the hybrid cloud, it deals with all your localization issues, all of your local, and then your cloud, which is still local, by the way, but it then can be distributed, because now you've got a UDC, a universal distributed data center, and now you can work between all the different countries. Like in the case of Al Jazeera, they're in multi-countries. You know, a lot of our other big broadcasters have 12 different channels across 7 different countries, and so now you have to go to a UDC, right, and a hybrid cloud to be able to accomplish all this. But at least the scheduling can stay the same. So now you're working in different countries, you're working in different languages, you're working on, but the media assets don't have to be replicated 100 times over to do that. So the work efficiency becomes so much better. And I think the more that people understand the difference between a hybrid cloud and a real cloud, especially in the broadcast industry, they realize by combining them together, they can pretty much solve any problem that they want, literally.
Now, you know, in my past, you know, I've worked with some files that are 7K or 8K, and you tend to transcode those to an HD delivery for an offline edit, and then you handcuff a suitcase to somebody with the high-res files on and send them on an airplane somewhere. Now, the technology that Michelle developed with the Aspira technology is ubiquitous throughout the industry. Michelle, could you talk a little bit more about how that kind of technology solves a lot of the problems we've had in moving those files around? And I'm also very interested in your comment about a content-centric internet. What does that mean, and how's it going to change the face of media workflows?
Well, I think maybe I'll take the content-centric question first and tie that back to where we've been with file-based workflows and high-speed transfer with file-based workflows. If you look at our comments here about the distribution of media workflows inherently being global, and secondly, the assets themselves being the dominant media, we built up, 10 years of workflows that are essentially about being able to move files from one system to another efficiently and then to automate around that. And if we take the internet as it was originally thought of, as a host-based communication network, if we really look at the architecture that evolved from that, we have kind of locked ourselves in presently into a client-server paradigm where the file-based workflow, albeit a step forward from where we were with physical tapes before, has now created an architecture where we, number one, have many duplicate copies, and a result of that is that we also have a repeat of workflows over and again where we're not only moving these files around, but we're also repeatedly storing them and managing them in asset management systems of all kinds with various workflow tools. And then we can add one more challenge to that, which is this sort of storage matter that's unnatural, which has sort of led to this hybrid versus sort of public or centralized cloud debate. And all of my comments are really about one key idea, which is we feel like in this new effort that myself and a few colleagues have started, that we need to think beyond this kind of traditional file-based workflow for the sake of what we're trying to do. And specifically what we mean is we think that, number one, we need to look at storage of media as being native to the bytes that represent the essence and the metadata. And that secondly, then, we ought to be able to create or leverage the decentralized concepts of the internet in order to create a content network where it is possible to utilize those native bytes through just-in-time techniques, which allow for a couple of things. First and foremost, avoiding the complexity and the duplication that's emanated from all of this file-based workflow buildup. Secondly, achieve the kind of personalization that we see kind of overarching the industry, and then also couple that in, as I mentioned, with decentralized commerce, particularly as accommodated through blockchain technologies. And this is really, I think, quite a radical idea, but it emanates from some of the academic work in internet technology, which started as themes of content-centric networking as opposed to a data or host-centered internet. And I think what makes this possible right now is our timing. Because of scalable compute, which comes from cloud technologies, because of advanced machine learning and AI, which we've heard a lot about, and because of decentralized trust, which is manifested through blockchain, it's now possible to build things like this. And so this is where I think we're going to see these things going, and of course that'll utilize high-speed transport, but goes far beyond just that piece of the workflow, and hopefully can really get at the true efficiency needs of such large scale.
Chris, could I get you to speak a little bit about the video on-demand services and the work with the third parties you've done as well?
So I was just going to quickly pick up on what Michelle was saying there, and it's interesting that one of the concerns is the amount of duplication of files and content which is actually being stored time and time again, and it's actually being attacked from the production side as well, with the implementation of IMF. And as Mark was on stage earlier on, we've got a working group within the DPP which is delving into mastering formats and IMF, and the ability to just store one file and then just make the differential delivered to actually compile any other alternate file for any other territory. So that's an interesting lead on that, and we haven't quite worked out how that fits in with the cloud and whether it is better in the cloud or out of the cloud. From a Sky perspective, one of our biggest challenges at the moment, and it's linking into what you said with VOD, is ultra-high definition, 4K if you want. And the size of those files, even when we're delivering them very, very quickly, takes a long, long time to deliver at the moment. And duplicating those or getting an error in those files is a concern, and it does. Encoding those files can take up to 10 times real time at the moment if you're creating a VOD asset. Mm-hmm. So looking at what you can do in the cloud for parallel processing and parallel encoding is actually quite interesting to actually speed up your deliverable. We're lucky at the moment because there's relatively few assets we need to process, but as it comes online and gets bigger and bigger and ultra-high definition takes off, then those concerns are going to get greater and greater. So, cloud technologies and parallel computing power is going to deliver something above and beyond what we can do at the moment. Whether we actually have to bring that in-house because we have a known workflow, or whether we actually push that out to a wider environment so we can share it across our territories in Italy and Germany, yet to be decided.
And one of the things that I spend some of my time talking about are codecs and wrappers and chroma subsampling and what is 8-bit, what is 10-bit, and why does it matter for the quality of our production? Is that challenge going to disappear with cloud technologies? I mean, video is just video, isn't it? Ben?
Oh, video is just video, sure.
If I'm a producer out there in the field, I need to be able to hit record on my camera and not worry about if I'm shooting progressive or interlaced, or if I'm recording DNX HD or ProRes or some other flavor or format or different wrapper. I just want to get it into the camera, capture the event, and tell the story. Right. So can I stop worrying about those kinds of things with cloud technology?
Well, I mean, you just mixed a bunch of things together in one giant sentence. So
that's codecs for you.
You know, the cloud's main purpose, as we look at it from a broadcast point of view, is to seamlessly integrate all these things together and make it easy for you to be able to tell the story. Because that's really the bottom line,
it's
right?
It's about the story.
So if you have to worry about the technology and you've got to run from your edit bay back to your editorial desk and you keep running around where you become inefficient, or you're wrestling with your machine trying to get it to run, well, if you got it in the cloud, as new tools come out, it's seamless to you. You'll be able to use them. And it doesn't matter where you sit or where you are in the world, you'll be able to sit down and work on your story. And that's the most important thing. Give the power to the creators back to the creators. I think Mohammed showed a beautiful thing of this robot building a Rubik's Cube, and that's a wonderful story. But at the end of the day, if it wasn't somebody to tell that story about how they built that robot and all the work they had to go through, and that's the creative part, right? Mm-hmm. So you want to be able to shoot, put that stuff up there, and you want to seamlessly be able to create that content without worrying about all of the codec things. You want that to all get figured out in the cloud. You shouldn't have to concern yourself with that.
Now, as a channel who creates documentaries and programs and news, how do we tell that story if we can't discover our content? And if we have thousands and thousands of hours worth of content sitting on servers, either on premises or in the cloud, how does the cloud enable us to, for example, enrich metadata? Hussam, what are some of the challenges we face right now in our archive systems at Al Jazeera?
I'll just comment on the last question that you asked Ben, actually, about the format and the codecs. And in fact, if you see recently, all the media organizations started really into activating the social media and uploading the footages to all the social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, and all of this. And if you look back at the broadcast preferable formats, interlaced, and for the platforms we have progressive, and you know, transcoding and changing the format is really an issue. And every time you do the transcoding, you lose quality. And always our target is to preserve the quality and make sure that we deliver a high resolution footage to either to our TV audience or in the social media. In fact, you know, when we think about systems and technology, we need to think about users, and that's what I mentioned in the beginning. So, for example, the media managers really struggle with this, and this is really an important matter that we need all of us to think about it. Think about how we can really have a seamless way of transporting media without keeping on creating generations for the footage. So it's an important matter, and I think solving this will make our life easy. And back to the question that you mentioned about the archive, and as Al Jazeera also working on improving our archive system, and recently we've worked to digitize massive amount of hours into our file-based archive. Also, the metadata and you know, enrichment is where we look at keep on improving, because if we have a proper metadata and in our archive system, then definitely we will be able to search quickly and find the material that we want, and especially in this period of time where we have a lot of news in our region here in the Middle East and also internationally. Those moments that were captured by our journalists and reporters and cameramen will be at some point in the future recalled and used again, where we need really to have improved metadata in order to search them and reuse them. So it's also one of our important nodes.
And I guess, many of the vendors are now partnering with the likes of Microsoft and Google and IBM. And if you think about the movie trailer Morgan, which I believe was selected using IBM Watson, the shots, but actually edited at the end of the day by a video editor. That was a story you told me last night, Ben, which is very interesting. How do we keep our assets secure, and how do we guarantee uptime in the cloud? Richard, would you like to speak to that one?
I'm going to cheat. Wait a minute, there it is. I'm going to cheat a second and go back a question if you don't mind, then I'll answer that. You're talking about metadata issues, and so Fox has a unique opportunity. We have an archive, Fox Movietone News. Some of you, a few of the people with gray hair like me might remember that, but back in the old days, before television, people went to the movie theater to get their news. And we have like 70 years of archive footage of that. So we're in the middle of a project to use AI to actually go through and create metadata for all of that, and then we're going to expand it to other contents as well, because there's literally thousands and thousands of hours. To have people sit in a room and do that would be virtually impossible. And all that exists today are some 3x5 cards with 2 words on them for a lot of this footage. So this is a very large project that we're doing. Microsoft was up here a minute ago, so we're doing that with Microsoft, but also with Google and Amazon to compare and contrast and whatnot. But it's an interesting project for us to try to figure out how to deal with all that content.
Because not all vendors offer the same services, do they?
Right.
Some do great transcription services, some do great scene recognition, some do great OCR, and it's finding that perfect partnership, I think, that is really important.
I can go back to your security question real quick. I said this yesterday, and I've said this many places. I have a great security team. We're very lucky. It's like 4 people. Anybody have any idea how many security people Amazon has, or IBM has, and I don't know. I'm going to guess thousands, maybe 10,000. There's no possible way we can compete. So these guys build government-rated data centers and things like that. We really are not concerned about security within a cloud system. Where things are porous is more where things are transported, right? Because they're not in a locked building, if you will. And for that, just as I'm sure you guys do, everything is encrypted. Anything in motion is encrypted. That's the only possible way to keep it secure in a modern age like this. And all of us have content that's very valuable, and we don't want it either stolen or used for perhaps a bad purpose. So that's really our solution.
So it's encrypted, and the broadcaster alone holds the key to access that content.
That's correct.
And I guess by its very nature, cloud itself is redundant. So you don't have to think about creating multiple copies or servers going down.
Again, like many things, you have to buy that if you want that. And we could get into a long discussion of cloud architecture if you'd like, and different regions and move stuff around the world. But I go back to an earlier discussion of hybrid cloud. I mean, we do believe hybrid cloud is the right answer. We are going to store things in our existing broadcast centers. Maybe not everything, but everything we need. And then the cloud will be a repository for the content, especially as it comes in. That whole ingest process I started with. Content starts there and then is replicated to the broadcast centers as necessary.
So I guess, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, we could have said that it's the technology that's driving the change of the media industry. And what we heard certainly from Mark and from other keynote speakers, that it's the actual consumer who's driving the change now. The demand for content is increasing. The demand across multiple devices is increasing. And to be able to provide that content on time and more efficiently, we need to make the tools simple and effective for the end users. So for example, instead of having to use 3 or 4 or 5 different bits of software or interfaces to create that content, we need to try and unify that into some kind of platform device. Michelle, would you be able to speak more to that, please?
Well, I'd like to, and I'd like to also combine my answer with the prior question about security of content, because I think, interestingly, these go hand in hand. And to help explain my points, let's start with just IMF and the production of media in these kind of package format's what the master that then has instructions that allow you to create derivatives. This overarching capability is permeating the industry right now. We just saw at HPA down in Southern California that the primary topic in the HPA community and post-production was how can we exploit IMF and related standards in order to change the way we think about media storage and distribution. Now, fast forward that to this idea of personalization and simplicity, right? So if we do this correctly, we ought to be able to store once native bytes and metadata and then intelligently compose on the fly what the user wants when they want it, right? And we save in every regard and we give them better content. Now, this is kind of a big idea and very different than things are done today because most content is pre-processed and then the various forms of consumer distributable versions such as HLS and Dash and streaming and other types of consumable versions are then typically pre-distributed out and consumers get what's available. That requires a lot of cost, infrastructure, CDNs, et cetera. But if we think about this in this different way, we have an opportunity to gain a huge amount of efficiency. Now, the tie back to security is also interesting. And again, I realize these are new ideas, but bear with me for a moment. If we start to think about security as being about the content itself, number one, and not only encryption of the content to protect it, but to think of that as a truly trust-oriented system, like Mohammed mentioned, what we really want to achieve is a situation where we don't have to trust what the content's running over because our model allows for protection end to end. And I think that's quite critical given the complexity of our IT systems. Unfortunately today, even with all the benefits of clouds, they are distributed, they do have redundant storage. One of the key concerns around security is the fact that one way or another, a piece of software somewhere has to be able to have the credentials to decrypt content as it's moving through the workflows. And that decryption might just be in memory, it might be transient, but any point like that that exists in the workflow does create an opportunity for vulnerability. And the reason this matters now, or we should consider it right now, is we can do better. It is possible to engineer truly trustless approaches with the content so that it can move through complicated workflows over the infrastructure and that software, if you will, provided by many of us vendors never has to have credentials to decrypt it, to transfer ownership or perform any other operation, DRM, et cetera. So I think these are some of the key ideas that are really interesting right now to think about how can we rethink this packaging just in time, if you will, preparation or rendering of content, and then finally this notion of decentralized and sort of trustless relationship of the content to what it flows over. So I know this is a lot to say in a few comments, but the time I think is here to do some of this.
You know, we spoke again yesterday, Richard, where you gave a great talk at Al Jazeera, and yeah, I am also still old enough to remember cutting on tape, cut a bit on film, and in fact did most of my video editing on VHS back in the day, you know. And then there was a big surge towards digibeta and then digital files and video editing. And you know, there wasn't so much of a fear. It was kind of like, oh, this is cool new technology, let's give it a go. But the cloud seems to come with this kind of raindrops kind of in there. That people are kind of scared that there's a thunderstorm in the cloud somewhere. How do we kind of allay people's fears around moving to the cloud, do you think?
The easy answer is go try it. But that may be a cop-out, I don't know. Look, we are all in on the cloud at Fox. We've had great success with it. Ben's talked about a lot of the benefits, you know, economics and things like that. This idea that has been discussed already about being able to burst or to deal with peak demands is hugely powerful.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, the real reason we like the cloud is we believe it will allow us to make the technology transparent to the creative people, which is really what our whole goal is. It's been discussed here. previously, but we want to empower creative people to be able to do anything they want to in the easiest way possible, so that they don't have to understand the technology or see, you know, any of the sort of mess that we, the engineers, have to deal with. So that's our goal, and I think, you know, one of the things, and Michelle's brought this up, and it's actually something we've been thinking about as well, this idea that why not store things natively? You know, we all have intermediate formats and house formats, and stations are typically built that way, but we're actually thinking very seriously in our new operation to store things natively. However it was created, whatever it is, that's as good as it's going to be.
Yeah.
We're going to store it that way, and we will manipulate it at the edge to whatever it is we want. So we get rid of lots of transcoding, obviously lots of different storage of files. Now, I don't know the technologies here yet. It's interesting to hear Michelle talk about it, so maybe it's closer than we think, but it's a really powerful idea that we're looking at.
So I guess what I'm hearing is that, you know, the cloud enables us in the technology and operations arena to have an elastic capacity, a scalable resource. It's an operating expenditure model rather than CapEx model. And from an editorial point of view, allows our content creators to spend more time creating and less time searching and metadata tagging and using different systems.
Yeah. It has, real quick, it has one other huge advantage. You can use it almost instantly. You can throw up a test bed, try something. If it works, expand it or bring it in-house if you want it in-house. And if it doesn't, just turn it off. No capital investment, relatively very little time. It's huge for prototyping and testing things.
Hussam, I know one of the things you and I have looked at is all those different interfaces that the guys do have to use, the media managers, the video editors, the archivists. You know, what for you can the cloud bring, and what should it bring to our operations staff to deliver content to the program makers?
Yeah, as we mentioned in the beginning, I mean, vendors should, I mean, when we talk about cloud, we need to be careful in here that, as Ben explained earlier, that we need to not to think that our infrastructure is going to be virtualized somewhere else, as much as all the vendors needs to think that their products needs to be a cloud product. And in here, if every vendor think that their system's going to be a cloud-oriented, I call it, this will for sure create a single interface where systems will be integrated with each other, and user will see one simple interface where he can trigger ingest, transfer of media, outgest, editing, and also submit to transmission. This is the chain that we, in the media operation, we use, so why we don't have it all in single interface instead of moving into different systems and different interfaces. Like you said in the beginning, Richard, it's not a matter of having products off the shelf and make them work. No, the products should work as we want. That's the key word.
So as a broadcaster, we shouldn't have to worry too much about whether it's vendor A, vendor B, or vendor C. They should all have this open ecosystem that we can hook into and get it to do the stuff we need it to do.
Yeah.
Right? You're smiling there, Richard. Would be nice, right?
That will be nice, yeah.
Well, we're looking to the future as well, right? Not just. And speaking of the future, does the future of TV look so very different to the TV of past? Isn't it always about story first, story second, and story third? And then we're just enabling our storytellers to tell those stories? Content is king. Or metadata.
Well, I don't know, you know, we say content is king, but we've got a lot of carriers out there saying, yeah, but, you know, we're the kingdom, and now it's time for us to merge together so that, you know, both the carriers and the actual content creators are working in tandem, because one's the kingdom. So we really have to look at that, you know, moving forward. So as we create content, broadcasting before was really about going to the TV. But if we look at the millennial generation now, they can be watching television on their laptop and on their phone, simultaneously consuming content. They're a very different breed. You know, that video proved today that they built a machine that can do a Rubik's Cube in 2.3 seconds. So their attitude is that there's nothing that's impossible. Mm-hmm. That's how the broadcast industry was 10, 15 years ago. I mean, we were all in there, we were young, and we thought anything was possible. So now when we advent the cloud, all the problems that we talk about, it's not really vendor specific, because once you're in the cloud, you know, you can, new technology comes out, you can pop it in 5 minutes, see if it works. If it doesn't like it, take it out. I mean, we have the ability of being really flexible at this stage of the game. But once you're in the cloud, now you can address your traditional broadcast. At the same time, you can deal with all of this, you know, really consumer-centric, IP-based, you know, social media-driven news. So now you've got to address both markets. And now when you add VR on top of that, you know, you say, okay, so now we're going to take our audience and immerse them into the actual story itself. And Al Jazeera has done a tremendous job. One of the most, you know, profound pieces of content was them going through the refugee camp. And I defy you to watch that and not be profoundly moved by it. So VR is going to make a big difference. So being able to render that in the cloud so the consumer doesn't have to figure out where to get the content, download it, where they can basically be able to render in the cloud. And that's the capability that our solutions give them. And the minute you start talking about that capability of rendering in the cloud, then now you're rendering your 4K in the cloud, you're doing all these other things that gives you flexibility. Because the bottom line is cloud's about flexibility.
Now, flexibility is one thing and time is another.
Of course.
And we're still bound by time and the speed of light. So, Michelle, any final comments before we close?
I thought one of the most interesting points around this came from Mark's talk, his keynote talk, where he looked at the sort of salient priorities of 2018, and quality of experience jumped out over just quality before. I think that kind of sums up where you're going with the consumer situation, because with the diversity, the demand, and all of these things that characterize people's consumption of video, that this is kind of crystallized into one, you know, sort of unifying dimension that is what is the quality of experience with the video that I can get, and then the consummate other side of that for us in technology is all aspects of it. How do we make those as good as possible for the consumer? And that's what I think this entire, you know, sort of thread of conversation is really about. Of course, it builds off of cloud technology, but it also calls for, you know, sort of not only streamlining, but really thinking deeply about how it is that we're going to make delivery and the user experience as good as it can be.
Thank you, Michelle. Chris?
Content is king. I think it's more consumption is king. It's starting with the end user and working your way back. You need to have good content, but you need to have a good consumer experience. And you know, the consumer just wants to go to one place, turn on that device, and pick up whatever piece of content they desire to use. And I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Sky Q system, but that's entirely the philosophy behind that. You have a central home hub, and it can stream out to any portable device, any large screen device, and you can watch it on the go as well. So you're bringing all the content into a single environment and actually giving the user one interface to select what they want, how they want, and effectively when they want. So yes, content is king, but I think the consumer is a bigger king at this point in time.
Thank you, Chris. Ben, I'm sure you'd agree with that. Anything to add?
I absolutely agree with it. You know, and this, you know, this new generation of I want my content the way I want it, where I want it, and on any device I want it on means that we have to really think about that. So he's right. Consumer is actually the king above all, because if they're not consuming the content, then we're all out of a job at the end of the day anyway.
Thank you, Ben.
Yeah.
Hussam?
That's right. I fully agree with this. Here, I mean, at the end of the day, we are in the media industry. I mean, the content is where we all want to produce good content and deliver the message that we want to deliver. So all the technology and everything around this is to enable and empower our editorial teams to deliver the message that we want. So definitely, that's right.
Thank you, Hussam. Final thoughts, Richard?
Yeah, I may disagree with my compatriots a little bit here. I really believe content is king, and it overrides everything, because people will watch a program they want to watch on the worst circuit with the most buffering, with the most whatever, if that's what they really want to see. And not that I advocate that we should distribute that way, but also quality of experience is interesting. It's not consistent. Remember, broadcasting, what we always did is perfect pictures, everything had to be great, no errors, right? And yet we all observe what we watch on our cell phones or on our tablets. So obviously quality of experience now has varied, and it has to be different depending upon what the medium is and perhaps dependent upon what the content is. If you think about news, Al Jazeera's main focus, people want to know what the news is, even if it comes on on a BGAN circuit with horrible compression artifacts and things. If it's a breaking news story, that's the good enough quality of experience, right? And again, not that that's our goal. We always want to make it better, and we do, but I think that's what's really important to take away from that. The quality of experience is not uniform. I think Mark's right. It is important. It may be the most important thing, but it does vary based upon what you're doing.
Michelle, Chris, Ben, Hussam, Richard, thank you very much, and thank you to the viewers at home for watching. And thanks to the great audience here from Al Jazeera and the wider world.
Thank you, everyone. And now I would like to invite you for lunch. Please, let's try to stick it to 1 hour so that we can finish the day earlier. We will have only 1 hour and a half after lunch. So 1 hour for lunch, 1 hour and a half after, and then you're free. Those of you who are interested in taking a tour at Al Jazeera, you can register your names somewhere there, probably. And the tour will be at 5 p.m.